Welcome to Sacred Rebellion. I'm Kim Andrick.
And I'm Lora Solomon. In this podcast, we defy convention and shatter the stereotypes of what it means to be healthy and holy.
It's time to rebel.
Let's do this. Coming up on this episode, here we are, Kim. We're back.
Another fun episode with a wonderful new guest. Super excited.
Zofia Rennea Morales. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Welcome. We are so happy to have you and learn from you and share you with our listeners. So let's introduce Zofia.
Yeah. So Zofia is an award-winning global strategist and former biophysicist. She at once had it all, according to 3D, it seems. A high-powered career, a loving husband, gorgeous properties, adventure, good friends. She was living the dream until her fast-paced life screeched to a halt and left her in pieces, brought to the edge of death by undiagnosed chronic Lyme disease and left bankrupt in every area of her life.
Wow. So desperate for a miracle. I feel this is a cliffhanger here. She cried her most heartfelt prayer and she said to the universe or whoever was listening, I'll do anything to get better. And this single prayer triggered an unanticipated Kundalini awakening. We got to definitely talk about that in this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a spiritual activation which unlocked her gifts as an intuitive healer, mystic, and it changed her life completely. Yeah. Be careful what you pray for, right?
Oh my goodness. Anything is a big word.
Yes, it is.
So Zofia is now the host of a talk radio program, Sovereignself, which airs Mondays at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Sovereignself.live, and is the creator of Conscious Enlyghtment Process, a transformation alchemist and teacher guiding clients to find gold within their most painful life transitions. She helps people from all backgrounds notice how life wraps the best gifts in the shittiest wrapping paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And her scientific, a little bit more scientific background appeals to clients who appreciate the way she is pragmatic. So this is sometimes the challenge in this world of energy and intuition for those of us who are more pragmatic and scientific. How do we connect the dots? How do we hold both of those things? How do we blend them and integrate them? So let's just jump in and learn more about Zofia.
Welcome, Zofia.
Yay.
Welcome to the rebellion.
I'm so happy to be here with the rebels. I see that Geico commercial periodically, Rebel Renee, and that was like my mundane name. And my husband looks at me and goes, yep. Mm-hmm.
Love that. So tell us a little bit about, this awakening and a little more detail around this cry and the response that you got.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've learned on my journey is that when it's time to wake up, your soul will wake you up and it will take away all of your favorite toys to get your attention. Okay. And so I lost the corporate career as part of this awakening process. I started to get very ill, which is why I lost the corporate career. And then I got more ill, and I'm looking for answers, right? And I'm going to all these doctors and nobody can tell what's wrong with me, but I'm getting increasingly sick to the point that I was having a conversation with my 70-year-old mother one afternoon. She's like, you are more unhealthy than I am. Mm-hmm. And that is despite doing all the right things. I mean, at this point, I had completely cleaned up my diet. I was exercising. I was doing all the things that they ask you to do, including meditation and visualization and all of this. And it just kept getting worse to the point that I couldn't remember words. I would forget entire chunks of my day. It was getting very bad. And so that was the next thing my soul took away from me, which was my amazing intellect. I've always had this incredible brain, this ability to solve problems, to answer questions. And that is getting eroded to the point that I can't cook dinner in 30 minutes anymore. It takes me 3 hours because I go in there. It's like, why am I in this room? Not why am I in the kitchen? Why am I in this room? Oh, it's a kitchen.
Wow.
And having to remind myself of each step as I go along. Okay, I came into this room to prepare dinner. Okay, open the refrigerator. What's in here? Okay, chicken is good. I'll bring this out. I'll bring that out. I can do this thing. And so I'll pile everything on the counter, and I'll turn around to grab a pan or whatever. And I'll be like, what am I doing with this pan? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, I was going to cook dinner. What was I cooking? I mean, it was really desperately bad. And one of the other toys that my soul took away was our income, not just mine, but my husband's. Okay. And he's always been the major breadwinner. He's always made more money than I have. And so we were kind of scraping along on what he was doing by himself, despite the fact that I couldn't work. And then he lost his job also. And pretty soon you're in bankruptcy. And that really restricts your options, right? Because when you go into bankruptcy, the trustee decides how you can spend money beyond like the basics to get your groceries and to pay the rent and the utilities. And so I'm in this place of very few options for myself and for us as a couple. And I was guided to the right doctor eventually, okay, because I had come to the conclusion that conventional medicine, as it's typically practiced, was not going to get me to where I needed to be. We discovered a bunch of health issues that I had that weren't responding to the conventional kind of stuff. For example, I had high cholesterol. They automatically want to put you on a statin, right? And my body was not having any of that.
No.
I tried every single statin on the market, and it was a trial to go through this. It wasn't like, oh, well, that's not working. I would start the statin and it would feel like I was coming down with the flu. Yeah. You know how your body hurts everywhere. And the longer I was on the statin, the more my body would hurt. And so after 2 or 3 days of this, I called the doctor's office. I'm like, I hurt all over. They're like, okay, that one's not going to be the one. Stop taking that one, and we'll call in a new prescription for you. Give it a week, and then we'll do it again. And so it was a couple months of, I feel like shit for 3 days. Then they take me off the thing and start me on something else that will make me feel like shit for 3 days. And okay, fine. So what we're going to have you do next is we're going to have you reduce your cholesterol intake, right? That's the next thing.
That's the worst thing possible for your brain.
Oh my God. And so, okay, fine. I go on this, high fiber and all this stuff that they recommend to reduce your cholesterol and eat more of, specific kinds of nuts and this sort of business. And it did not make a difference. Cholesterol number stayed exactly where it was. It was like I hadn't done anything at all. They're like, okay, well, we can put you on high dose niacin, for example, right? Yes. And so they gave me high dose niacin, and I'm like, this is really weird. I'm feeling puffy in my face. And I have a lot of like environmental allergies. At this point, I didn't know I had food allergies yet, but I had a lot of environmental allergies. And I'm like, it's like I've gotten into a bunch of dust. And I looked in the mirror and I'm all red, and I can see literally that my face has gotten puffy. I'm like, well, that's not very cool. And I got a headache, I think it was, at the same time. And a few hours later, it would kind of like die down and settle down. And I talked to my doctor. I'm like, is this normal? She's like, a little flushing is normal. And I took it again the second day, and it was worse. And the headache was worse, and the inflammation was worse, and it stayed longer. And I asked her, I'm like, what's going on? She says, well, you might want to try taking like an Advil or something with it. the next time, which I did. And it really made like almost no difference. And so I was like, okay.
Why is that always the solution? Let's take another drug.
Let's take another drug to deal with the side effects.
Deal with the side effects
exactly.
that's giving you the issue and not fixing the problem.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's not approach this from another angle. So, I mean, we went through all of the stuff that they do for high cholesterol, and none of it was making a difference. And then I had discovered the idea of food allergies. Mark Hyman has a book called like the Simple Diet, or I forget exactly the title of the book, but it's a very simple exclusion diet plan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like,
elimination diet. It's super simple. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so I'm like, okay, I will do that. And I did that for 2 months, something like that. I forget what the length of his plan is. And I got to the point where I was trying to reintroduce some stuff. And we did some more blood work. And the doctor's like, what have you been doing? What do you mean? Your cholesterol has improved by like 60 points.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I've been looking for and apparently avoiding food allergies.
Yeah. So your body was in a chronically inflamed state.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, and the thing that I've discovered since then, which I discovered with the doctor who eventually diagnosed me, was that I'm an overproducer of cholesterol. This is what my body does when it's under assault.
Yeah, it's a stress response.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is what my body does to try to protect itself.
Right. And so often with cholesterol, that's what happens. Cholesterol gets targeted as the bad guy.
And it's just there trying to help. I'm just here trying to help.
It's just there trying to protect you.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the guy that runs over to the man who's been mugged and is trying to help him, and the cops come and arrest him. It's like, no, I didn't shoot this guy.
I'm just here to help her.
I was just trying to keep him from bleeding out on the sidewalk, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So then how did it shift to you understanding that there was even something deeper going on? So how it shifted was, it was better, but it wasn't fixed. Right. Okay. Because I went from a total cholesterol of like 230 to a total cholesterol of 180, which the doctors are still like, and the insurance company is sending all these letters going, put this lady on a statin, right?
Which is not happening. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm continuing to seek answers, and I decided I needed a less siloed physician.
Yes.
Okay, because they get very siloed. You're required to specialize, and the eye doctor doesn't know much about, what goes on with your diabetes or your kidneys or whatever it is.
Right.
And so the less siloed doctor option is the functional medicine doctor.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to look for a functional medicine doctor who took my insurance. Now, this is a zebra.
Yes, it is, because I've worked in functional medicine. They don't typically take
insurance. They don't want to mess with it, because it's every time you go to do anything, it's a fight with the insurance company, because the insurance company wants you to give the patient a pill and make them go away.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Don't do anything involved with this person. We're not paying for it.
So who did you find?
I found a functional medicine guy who was covered under my insurance. There was one.
Is it in Minnesota?
No, that was actually in Indianapolis. We were in Indianapolis at that point in our journey.
Okay.
And so I went to him, and we did tests. Oh my God. The first time he drew blood to do tests, I thought I was going to need a transfusion afterwards. I mean, they come with this rack of tubes. I'm like, oh, wow. It's weird that she brought everybody's tubes over. And then I discovered those are all my tubes.
Wow.
And is he the one who discovered the Lyme disease?
Ultimately, he is. We went through several rounds of, he's the one that encouraged me to get my DNA sequencing done, which is how we learned I'm an overproducer of cholesterol, because he was looking for methylation defects, because that can cause the kind of exhaustion and stuff that I was dealing with. We looked for Epstein-Barr, we looked for heavy metal overloads, all of this kind of stuff. And there was nothing to be found on the heavy metals front. the methylation, although it was helpful to me in ways I had not expected, because I have a methylation defect that is at the root of, and there's a long list of these,
Yeah.
chronic depression,
Is it
OCD, autism, schizophrenia.
right? It's the MTHFR.
No, it's not the motherfucker. Sorry.
That's okay. You can say
That's
that
what we
here.
call it in the
We're
business.
rebels.
Yeah, I don't have the motherfucker. This is the MAO-A mutation, and it's
Okay.
at the roots of all of this like physiological stuff. And everyone in my family, my mother is, what do I want to say, borderline OCD. I mean, it is her way or the highway. It has to be done just so. Okay. My sister has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and addictive tendencies. I have a nephew who's on the autism spectrum, and I have gone through my life with this struggle with clinical depression. But you supplement the instructions for making the enzyme that goes with that, so your brain can actually balance itself. Bye-bye antidepressants. It was amazing. You know, that was lovely. Unexpected. I wasn't looking for an answer to that. I'd kind of just assumed I was going to spend all my life trying to, you know, keep myself pumped up and motivate myself to get out of the bed. But it makes a difference when your brain has the instructions to be able to balance your brain chemistry. So that was amazing, but I was still getting increasingly exhausted. I was still having trouble remembering the things I needed to remember, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And so we eliminated all these other culprits, and he's like, I suspect you probably do have Lyme. And it was fairly easy for me to accept that, because in the 90s, the early 90s, I'd read an article, and this is when they were just discovering what Lyme was. And I'm going through it and I'm like, reading the symptoms going, yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yeah. I think this might be what's going on with me, because at that point in my life, I'd already discovered that, you know, every year it was like somebody had piled another 20-pound rock into my backpack and said, you know, go get them, kid. And so I was reading this article and I'm like, okay, I have to figure out who the doctors are who know about this. And so I'm getting down to the bottom of the article and anticipating this information. And the article wrapped up with this paragraph that said, but don't worry. Lyme is only transmitted by this specific tick that lives in the northeast of the United States. And so if you live someplace else, you know, it's not likely that you would have this. Well, I've never been to that part of the country at that stage in my life. And so I was like, oh, damn, here I thought I had my answer. But what they've learned since then was any tick can carry Lyme disease. And it is global. It is pandemic Lyme disease. So you can get it anywhere in the world.
So when he got that diagnosis, did you start to get better right away when you started treating that?
Well, you know, that's a very good question, because that's what you would like to think. But the thing is, Lyme is very poisonous when it's active in your body, and it's worse when you kill it, because when it's alive, it just kind of trickles out these toxins. When you kill it, it explodes and releases them all in this big geyser. So you feel a shit ton worse as you're going through the conventional therapy. Yeah. And he started me on the conventional antibiotics that they use with this thing, and they rotate a whole bunch of them. He's got this plan that's 2 years long. Yeah. And intense. a 70% success rate, and all of these exotic antibiotics and IVs. And I'm like, damn, this is going to be pricey. And so I'm feeling much worse because I'm on my first round of antibiotics. I'm struggling to deal. And I called the insurance company and said, okay, here's my diagnosis. I have this treatment plan. How much of this are you going to cover? And the insurance people said, and this is a quote, "We don't believe in chronic Lyme disease." I'm
That's
like,
convenient.
Thank
isn't
you.
that convenient? My reaction exactly.
I don't believe in insurance companies, but we both have this to deal with.
I've kind of come to that conclusion, and that was actually the point at which
Now you know why so many functional medicine providers don't believe in
Don't-
insurance.
exactly.
Because the insurance companies don't believe in anything they're treating.
Well, the insurance
Or
companies
hardly
want to
anything.
drive the boat, really. They would like to tell you what you can do in order to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't believe in it, they're going to tell you you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you allow yourself to be limited by what the insurance company is willing to pay for, you are going to be stuck.
And
Yeah.
taking a lot of pills.
And taking a lot of pills and more pills and more pills.
And you're not going to get well.
No.
Which is what I discovered.
Yeah. And it's as a healthcare provider, it's so challenging, to go and do functional medicine training, have all this knowledge, and someone calls you and they want to see you. And the first question they have is, do you take insurance?
Yeah.
And it's like, and the question needs to be, does insurance
support this plan, this
support,
direction?
does insurance support you getting well?
Yeah.
And in fact, it does not support you getting well because they
does not.
want you to want them.
Well,
And-
the whole healthcare system is based on us being sick. So it's really not in their best interest for us to be well.
Well, they want you to be just the right amount of sick, right? We want
Yeah.
you to be the amount of sick that you feel like you need us on a daily basis, but not so sick that we have to pay for anything that's really expensive.
It's like the perfect codependency, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I had this conversation with them, and the bottom line of the conversation was 60 days of oral antibiotics, full stop. I said, oh, okay. And the doctor's visits, right? She says, oh, yeah, that's one thing you need to know before you get off the phone. Your doctor's no longer in network.
Mm.
I'm like, that's all it needed. So I hung up the phone with her, and I'm like going through my options.
Can we just pause here for a
Sure.
second? Because I want to acknowledge you and where you were in that moment, because you were sick, not able to think, not able to cook. I mean,
and significantly limited resources, it sounds like,
Right.
in terms of monetary resources.
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that somewhere inside of you was a belief that you could get better, that you were worthy of getting better, right? Because those are the ingredients that have to be there. That something inside of you that was like, I will find a way to be well. And
Yes,
just what
well,
odds you were up against.
And there was a piece inside of me that was unwilling to accept that I was going to be ill this way forever.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is whatever you want to call that. It's like, that is the ultimate rebellion.
Well, and it also is, as we stated in your introduction, like this, it is this, which we all have, right? But this intuition that resides in each of us that you were willing to hear.
Yeah. And I hadn't acknowledged it for that quite yet, but I had started to shift into working more intuitively. I'd had a little bit of introduction to muscle testing, for example.
Was this functional medicine doctor doing any of that?
He did, but I'd run into it before him. I had run into it in the form of Psych-K, if you've ever heard of it. And I actually did some Psych-K, but the muscle testing they do in that world is a 2-person operation. And what really unlocked it for me was learning how to muscle test on myself. It's like, I'm going to take the control here. I'm going to be in the seat. I'm going to ask and answer the questions in the moment I need the questions asked and answered, right?
Yes.
The doctor does me no good when I'm in the grocery store going, can I eat this, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it going to support my health to buy this, take it home and eat it?
And the thing is, with the body, it's such a dynamic entity. What could be a yes on a Tuesday might be a no on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And a yes again on a Thursday. I mean, because it is not, it's always changing. And
yeah. And the amount of stress your body's under in that moment is different. And so something that might be a little troublesome on a normal day-to-day basis, but not a problem. If you're having a rough day already, it's going to be the straw on the camel's back.
Yeah. So that there's just no substitute for finding your path to that inner knowing.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to access it, but and so many ways that it tries to get our attention, and sometimes with a 2x4 over the head, and literally bringing us to our knees.
I've met the 2x4 to the head many times on my journey. I think it's because I'm German and Norwegian. I've got one parent from each of those, and boy, it's a double dose of stubborn and stoic.
Well, and it also, I mean, it's so often we hear this dark night of the soul, and you even talked about it. You talk about it a lot. It's this, when you're going, it's that gift wrapped in shitty
wrapping paper. Exactly.
Right.
And I was not happy at all about the wrapping paper that I had in that moment.
Yeah.
No. And it really is the hero's journey, right? You get the call to adventure, which is, your health is spiraling down, and all the normal stuff.
Yeah, all the rest of it drops away, right?
Yeah.
That's I think one of the reasons that your soul chooses to illness frequently as a path to wake you up, because it's the hall pass in some ways in our modern society. If you are sick, you can get out of anything,
right?
And it will get you time. It will get you time. Exactly. To sit on your own and to examine things. And I think that's part of the reason that illness and injury typically feature large in a turning point like this in someone's journey.
Yeah. So let's talk about the turning point now.
This is my turning point. I've arrived at this pinch point if you don't understand what the pinch point is, my family are dairy farmers. And dairy cows are relatively tame, but they won't stand there and take a lot of what you need to do to them, like trimming hooves and giving them pills and that kind of stuff, by just asking them nicely. So what you do is you herd them from the pasture into a smaller pen, into an even smaller pen, and you run them down a chute to a pinch point where it locks around their neck. They can't go right, they can't go left, they can't go forward or backwards. And now you can give them the pill or turn their loose or whatever you need to do. And your soul will do that to you at some point if you are not listening. And I'm continuing to not listen. And this is my pinch point moment, because the insurance company is not paying for it. The bankruptcy trustee has already decided how we are spending our money. There's no extra money. My husband has gone back to work at a third of his normal earning potential. So it's bare freaking bones right now.
Pinched.
Oh, are we pinched? There are no spare pennies. And he's gone back to graduate school for another degree because his industry has changed. And for him to be able to continue to do the work that he needs to do, he needs another degree. So he has zero extra time because he is working full time, he's going to school full time, and he is caretaking for a wife who is sick as heck. And I need to clear my throat for a second. So he's carrying the majority of the duties at the house at this point as well. So it's not like he can do anything extra. I'm doing as much as I can just to try to find a way to get myself well. There's no money. And so I only had one other possibility that might be in my mind, and that was to call my father. Now, I was raised in Minnesota by a Norwegian and a German. You will be independent. You will take care of your stuff. You do not go back and live in your parents' basement. This is not how this thing works. And that's what I was raised with. But I decided that this moment right here might be the moment to ask for help. Wow. And so I called my father and explained the situation. And he said that the bank of Dad was empty.
Wow.
And that night, I laid down next to my husband to rest because I wasn't sleeping at that point. The Lyme had toxified my brain to the point I wasn't going through sleep cycles. And so I discovered if I lay down and rest and work at meditating, because it didn't last very long, my focus was, but if I would keep returning to, okay, I'm going to meditate, I would be a little refreshed when we got to the morning as opposed to completely wiped out. But that night, the meditating was not happening. My brain was like this trapped squirrel, and it was bouncing off all of the walls I'd already run up against with the money and the time, and I can't be employed, and I have this answer. And if I reach my arms through the bars of my cage and I stretch my arm out, it's still just beyond the ends of my fingertips to get to the key that will let me out of this cage. And it was about 3 a.m. that little rational-minded scientific 2 + 2 = 4 me decided that it might be time to have a conversation with God. Hadn't talked to God in decades. There's a part of me that's like, really, this is going to be your first ask? But it's like, screw it. I have no other answers. What I need right here is a miracle. Because I've looked for all the options, and it's rock, hard place, brick wall, bedrock underneath me. There's no way out of this place. So I said, God, I will do anything to get better. And I meant it with my entire being. And a little voice in my mind said, really? Anything? And I thought about that very seriously for a while, because anything is a big commitment. What are my edges? What are my ethical and moral edges on this commitment? And I won't hurt another person. I'm not going to lie to them. I'm not going to steal or do that kind of thing. These are my edges. And the God that I know and understand would never ask me to do anything like that.
Right.
This being distinct from the Yahweh of the Old Testament, who asked for all that kind of shit. But that's a whole different rebellion conversation.
Oh yeah, I could talk about that all day.
We have.
Okay.
Another day.
But the God that I know and understand is love, and is very allowing of what we are and forgiving of what we are, and would never ask me to step over those lines. So I said, God, just to be super clear about who I'm committing to, I will do anything. And I got my first miracle because I fell asleep. Really, truly fell asleep. And in the morning, I awoke with this clarity that I had to go get one of these clearing IVs that were $250 a piece. No idea how I'm paying for it, but the good news is medical doctors are patient about their payment. So I got in to get this IV, and I'm sitting in the infusion room, and the doctor walked through. Highly unusual, because that's not where the doctor goes. That's the nurses. So I waved him over and I said, here's the situation. Insurance is out of the picture. I'm a cash pay client who's in bankruptcy. In other words, I don't have a lot of cash to be able to pay you with. What can you do to work with somebody in this circumstance? Because doctors are compassionate people. They generally have something. They don't advertise it. You have to ask for it. And he said, well, if insurance is out of the picture and your cash pay, you should know that we have a naturopath herbalist who's on our staff. His appointments are half the cost of mine. He has great success with parasitic infections, which Lyme is a parasitic infection. So that's right up his alley. And instead of using these exotic antibiotics and IVs and all this kind of stuff, he uses herbs. And they're like $20 to $40 a bottle, which is much more affordable.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I will take much more affordable. And so I made an appointment to see him when I got out of my IV. And a week or so later, I'm back in the office waiting to see him. I've been told it's going to be a wait. So now I'm scrounging around for something to read in the meantime because busy brain. I don't want to leave it idle. That would be very bad. So I found a book of all things in the waiting room. How often do you find a book in the waiting room of the doctor? Like 0 times. It's all fluffy magazines. And this book said on the front, The Emotion Code. Now, emotions have been a bugger to me my entire life. I mentioned Norwegian and German. What we're taught about emotions is
you don't have them. Only
you
weak
don't
people
have them. Not happy, not sad, not proud. No, you're stoic. Stoic. You just do your thing. You don't let on anything that's going on inside you.
You don't even really have emotions. Emotions are for those weak people.
Weak people, exactly. Push it down. Pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
Okay. Which had not been working for me. I'd spent decades in talk therapy. I mean, yeah, it was not a good solution. So I was very interested in the emotion code and started reading it. And then somebody came back for their book. They'd forgotten it in the waiting room. Dang, now I got to go buy the book. And so I started going through this book and learning that we actually use those pushed down, packaged up emotions to try to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And frequently we will turn them into something that's called a heart wall. Now, before he even introduced heart wall, I knew I had one of these. I'd seen it over the years. I make choices, or at that point in my life, I would make choices about who I allowed into my inner circle, who I allowed behind that heart wall. And it was a high bar to get behind my heart wall. And he made the case that, you know what, you don't need this. I'm like, really? And he described how wonderful life was without one. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to make it my mission to take that sucker down. Here comes the planner. The planner comes out, and we figured out how many we had and how many were in the heart wall and how many heart wells we had, which turns out to be 3. And I started systematically taking this thing apart. And I'd gotten through a couple of days of taking this heart wall down, and strange shit started happening in my life. Things that the scientist was very unhappy about. I spoke in a language I hadn't learned. I was seeing crossed over dead people and fairies. I was knowing things about the past and the future that I had no way to know. And that's, hang on a second, the dog is fussing. She's getting impatient. So anyway, I was having all these weird experiences, and the scientist in me is like, well, you must have heard that Hebrew prayer at some point in your upbringing in the middle of Minnesota, where I think there are maybe 3 Hasidic Jews. Right. Sure you did. You have this overactive imagination. You're seeing these things because your brain has been eaten up so extremely by this Lyme disease, right? I'm coming up with all these reasons that this stuff is happening and trying to discount and write it all off. And I've noticed that it's really hard to go into stores now. It's like walking into a rock concert at full volume. It's just this impact of energy into your body, and it's hard to stay in the store for very long. And I'm like, I do not know what's going on with me, but this is really sucking in a lot of ways. I mean, it's kind of cool. There's this part of my brain that's going, this is kind of cool. I think you might be a little like clairvoyant or psychic or something like that. And the scientist is like, sit down and shut the fuck up, right? Don't go down that road. And so there was an afternoon I was with my naturopath, and his son worked with him and ran some of the electronics that he used to rebalance your system with. And I was talking to the son, who turned out to be a medical intuitive, and I mentioned some of this stuff, and he's like, oh, you're waking up. That's what's happening. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I start like reading all these books, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe, but I'm not quite sold that this is really what's going on. And then I came home from the grocery store one afternoon, and my neighbor was helping her husband into the house, which sounds innocuous on its face, but she's staggering under his weight. They're both in their mid-80s, and neither of them are steady to start with. So this is a disaster waiting to happen. I left the groceries all melting in the car and went over and helped him back in the house. And she's explaining to me as we're getting in the house that his kidneys have gotten really bad. She's got to go make this emergency appointment with the kidney doctor because she's really super concerned for him. And so she goes off to make the phone call, and I'm with him in the living room trying to kind of, make him comfortable, which is not possible. When your kidneys hurt, your kidneys freaking hurt. And there's no good position. There's nothing you can do to change that pain. So I'm just in the living room with him, holding his hands, and I can see his eyes are closed, his lips are moving, and I know them to be very devout people. So this is a private moment that he's having with God. And I'm just voyeuristically looking at him. I'm not comfortable with that. So I closed my eyes to give him some privacy. And in my mind's eye, I see this little flame. It's like a pilot light. And you know how they kind of dance and pop when they're on the edge of kind of going out and going, poof.
Yeah.
That's what I was seeing in my mind's eye. And I was given this understanding that that is where he's at with his life force right now. He's on the edge of, poof, and he's out of here. I haven't acknowledged who I'm talking to. I just said in my mind, is there something we can do about that? And it flares up into this powerful bonfire, and he drops my hands. So of course my eyes whip open to see what's going on. And he says, "Are you a healer?" And I'm looking around to see who the heck he's talking to, because this, no. This healer stuff doesn't jive with the science stuff. And his wife came back in at that moment, saved me from having to answer. Thank you. And she says, "We've got this appointment. We've got to leave right now if we're going to make it." So I hustle him back out to the car, and I went and hid in my house for a couple of days while the scientists convinced me that nothing happened. And I'm being an extremely bad neighbor. I should have, at this point, gone over to check and see how I could help them, maybe brought some chicken soup, the things that you do for people who are going through a tough time. And so I finally got my nerve up, and I went back next door and tapped on the door with a little apprehension, because I don't know if they're home, if she's, keeping watch in the ICU or what's happening. And she opens the door with a smile on her face. Okay, that's good. And says, "Come on in. Jay has so many questions for you."
Oh.
I'm like, oh. And I walk in the living room, and he's kicked back in his Barca lounger, looking fat and happy. He's got a drink at his elbow and his book and his remote. I'm like, looking pretty good. "How you feeling, Jay?" It was the strangest thing. By the time I got to the doctor's appointment, I was feeling pretty normal. And they put me through all the usual battery of tests, and my kidney function came back normal.
Wow. So you get a really strong message that you are a healer.
Yes. And the scientist in me had to sit down and take a chair on that one, because he's got a file of deteriorating kidney disease. And if you talk to a kidney doctor, they will tell you this shit goes only one direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say the scientist, that's the voice in your head, basically.
It's the voice in the head. It's all of the way that I've approached the world all of my life.
Yeah.
Right. It's all of the programming. It's the
wall.
It was my wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I had such a visual when you were talking about limes, because one of the things that limes is it's a wall builder.
Yes, it builds these little crypts that it goes and hides in.
Right. And so it was almost like the limes was helping you with your wall building.
Well, it's probably part of the reason I allowed the Lyme to hang around, right? It's another wall builder. It's like me.
Yeah. I mean, so I think understanding the way the world works and this resonance, right?
Yeah.
That you have, especially something like like a chronic disease, if you're not resonating with it on some level, it doesn't stick around. It's not comfortable. It's not happy. It doesn't like your space.
Yeah,
Right.
and my space doesn't like it, right? It
Right.
will leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think to understand that in a way that's not blaming the, so blaming the sick person, like, oh, it's your fault you have
Yeah.
Lyme.
Yeah,
It's not like,
no, that's not how that works.
no,
I
but
hate
it's
it when
like,
people go there.
and I don't, but it's also understanding that, we live in this world of frequency and resonance. So if there's something in your resonance, it's there to show you something, to help you see something, to expose something, to bring you to a better place,
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it
and
is a gift.
I'm big on response ability. Okay. And I
Yes.
make that into two different words because it is about how you respond to what's showed up.
Yes.
I don't buy into the law of attraction. Well, you attracted the Lyme disease. Well, no, Lyme disease was just one of those shit happened
Right.
kind of things.
Right.
But what you choose to do in response to
Right.
having it is what makes the difference in your world. Because I could have made different choices. I
Yes.
could have accepted that I'm just going to be this exhausted, mentally marginally
Impacted.
functional person for the rest of my life. I could have made that choice.
Walled off,
Walled off,
not in touch with emotions,
not in touch with the world,
not
just
experiencing your soul healing gifts, like all of those things
and just shut myself away in my house. I could have made that choice.
Right.
And at any point in that process, had I decided, you know what, I'm done with this, I can make a different choice.
Yeah.
It's all in your responsibility. Just because you've made one choice, perhaps to identify with illness, does not preclude you from changing that choice down the road.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that we kind of focus on here at the Sacred Rebellion podcast, because the other thing that I hear is so much of mainstream practices, mainstream institutions were heavily inviting you and even telling you that there wasn't another option, but inviting you to believe that first path, that I just need to accept that I'm just going to forever be sick and have to make the decision on whether to, take their path to health or
find my own way out of this.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's a rebellious act in a way to listen to that intuition and to believe that there's a gift in this challenge and to move towards, that intuitive impulse.
Yeah. Well, and since we're talking about rebellion and sacred rebellion, my rebellion in this whole thing actually happened a few years before I even got to that point. And my rebellion was, I decided I was one of the experts that was in that exam room.
Yes.
And that is not something that society tells us. Society tells us to go to the person in the white coat. They are the authority on everything.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
They are not the authority on everything. Okay.
No.
You are the expert on what your body is doing and how it's responding.
Yes.
Yes.
And if it's not responding in a way that is supportive to you, that brings you more fully into life, it's my responsibility as the expert on that state to push back.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big learnings with the whole cholesterol situation.
Yeah. And I think so many of our listeners can relate to that, that experience of knowing something deep down inside, but being with some type of authority figure, whether it's a parent or a doctor or a political person or just a boss, somebody in a position of power, and not trusting themselves, but knowing, like having this knowing, just this deep sense of this isn't working for me. This is not life. This is not life-giving. This is not bringing me to a better place where I can share my gifts or be a better version of myself. This is diminishing me in some way.
Exactly.
And I'm constricting and I'm getting smaller and I'm being diminished. And, so, I mean, really, I guess that's what the rebellion is all about.
And sometimes you have to fire your doctor.
Yeah.
I had a doctor that I was going to at one point, and I canned his ass because every time I went in there and said, geez, I've got this pain behind my eyes and in my sinuses, and I think I've got a sinus infection again. He's like, well, duh, you have allergies. That's not the reaction I'm looking for from my doctor. What I'm looking for from my doctor is, okay, let's see what else we can do to help manage the allergies. Is there another way we can approach this? Maybe there's a specialist we need to bring in, right? And so if he's
just the respect of being an authority of my own body.
My own condition.
I am a greater authority on my body than
and how it feels,
and your studies and your degrees and all of that can ever be.
Exactly. And so I took back the white coat authority on that. And I'm like, by God, I'm a scientist. I know how to read these medical papers as well as he does. I can go read this shit myself. And that's how I discovered the idea that perhaps I should look at an exclusion diet and some food allergies, because one of the reasons your body will overproduce cholesterol and not respond to the absence of external cholesterol in your diet is because you are inflamed.
Yep.
If you are chronically inflamed, it will do this. Okay. Well, I know I have allergies, environmental allergies. It would not be a stretch to know that I also have some sort of food allergy or sensitivity. So I'm going to bark up that tree.
Yeah.
And it was part of the answer. It moved my cholesterol 60 points. But the remaining part of that answer was the freaking chronic Lyme. Because after we took care of the Lyme infection, my cholesterol came back into normal.
Yeah. And then underneath that was your soul gifts trying to come through.
Absolutely.
I mean, so it's like, none of that was wrong, but it was like a layer after layer.
After layer to get you to pay attention to the important thing.
But if someone would have come into you at the very beginning and said, I see what's happening, your soul gifts are trying to come through, you would have been like, what the heck are you talking about? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you needed the journey of,
I had to come to the conclusion.
Right. The elimination diet and treating the Lymes, like that, it had to be that way for you.
Well, and let's put it this way. There were opportunities all the way along that path for me to go, oh, maybe I should dig deeper on that, right? Mm-hmm. Because with the Psyche, there was a little bit of well, maybe I should learn to do this. Mm-hmm. But I was so sick at the time, it was like, yeah, I'm not going to try and put anything extra on my plate.
Yeah.
But I could have taken that off ramp right there. Mm-hmm. I could have put that extra thing on my plate and probably arrived a little bit different path to the same place. Maybe not, right? Mm-hmm. There's always more than one exit off of one of these paths. It depends on how open you are and curious to explore something different. I had the blinders on and I'm running my stubborn and stoic. And so, I needed the spiritual 2x4 up the head.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked with people that like 3 or 4 years ago, if I would have said something to them, they would have been like, looked at me like I had,
grown a second head.
Yeah. And then in their own way, they came to it. And then we kind of laugh about it. And I'm like, I could see this then, but I knew you were not willing to have that kind of conversation. And it is like a respect of,
where people are. And trusting that they're, trusting a person that they can find their way.
And that their path is, because your path is unique, and the people that you serve are going to respond to your particular approach because not in spite of it, but because of who you are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That they might not respond to someone that's too woo or too open or too
immediately.
Whatever.
Yeah. This is the first answer is woo. Well, maybe sometimes not. Yeah. I think having spent many years in the corporate world as a troubleshooter actually adds a lot to my current practice as a healer, because there are lots of amazing tools out there. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've had this experience. Somebody's like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Emotional freedom technique was one of those things for me. This is the greatest things. Yeah, tapping. And so I took a whole thing on tapping, and everybody's getting these amazing results, and it's not doing squat for me. I'm like, oh man. But the thing is there's nothing wrong with tapping or emotional freedom technique. It just wasn't the tool that I needed in that moment to solve my problem. It didn't address the problem. It's like walking into your house and you flip the light switch and nothing happens. Okay, your first conclusion is, let's change the light bulb, right? Climb up there, change the light bulb, flip the switch, still nothing happens. Does that mean you're a crappy light bulb changer? No. Does it mean you did it wrong? No. Does it mean it's a bad solution? No, it's just not the solution for the problem that's going on right now. Maybe the switch itself failed.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to change.
Yeah. And I think it's really good as a healer to not be defined by a modality.
Yes.
To show up with your intuition, to have a repertoire of tools that you can use, and then to trust the intuition of which tool to use in that moment, and in relationship, because it's not just you pull out a tool and you offer it and then see what the response is, right? Because it's a relationship. It's not you walking in as the expert. It's like,
exactly.
I got this. You want to try this? Yes or no? Okay. No hard feelings. Let's try something else. So
I had something like that happened with a client. He had a pain on the left side of his chest in the first session that we did together. And I went in there, and we're not just physical beings, we're spiritual beings. And there's this continuum of selfness that happens that is not visible to your normal physical eyes. It's called the light body or the spiritual body. Some people talk about the aura. It's all kind of part and parcel of that same structure. And I do light body surgery. And in this case, light body surgery was the thing to do because he had a heart attack structure in place in that section of his chest. And so I went in and I removed the heart attack structure. And his heart, by the way, got a lot better. They were able to do the surgeries on him they wanted to do. But that to the side, the second session he came and he said, I've got a pain on the right side of my chest also. Can you do the same thing? And I looked at it and I said, no, I can't do the same thing because it's not the same problem. The pain is similar. It's located in a similar area, just on the other side of your body. But this is actually a forgiveness process you're going to have to walk through for yourself. And he's like, oh God, I don't want to do this.
I'm like, pain.
You can leave it there, but here's what you'll do. And if you trust a little bit and you walk through this process with me, I think you'll be surprised. And so he finally said, okay, I'll do it. And one of the parts of my forgiveness process is you have to describe what it is that you did without ducking your responsibility for it. Okay. Which he did. And we went through the whole process and he's like, wow, it's gone. Yep, exactly. That's how that works. But you have to have the right tool for the right thing. And it's not always symptom driven.
Yeah. All right. We ready for the lightning round?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. I'll go with the first one. We've kind of already answered this one, but we can see if you want to elaborate in any way. In what ways have you rebelled on your journey to health?
Okay. Well, I already mentioned that I took back the goddamn white coat authority.
Yes.
I'm the healer in the room, by God.
Yes.
But the corollary to that is when I work with somebody, they're the healer in the room. As much as I claim the title of healer because that's how we use it in society, the truth is, and the net experience of working with me is that you are the healer.
Yeah.
All the information for where we need to go comes out of your being, out of your experience, out of your physical sensations, and is actually led by your higher self.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. What is your definition of the word holy?
Holy. I want to say that everything in this world is holy. It may be used in unholy ways, but everything is holy, because my definition of God is that God is in the heart of everything around us. It's in every little cell and fiber of your being. It's in every atom and molecule in the desks around you, in the rocks outside, in the plants that grow, in the animals that are in your world. God is. Full stop.
I love it. All right. Final question. What would you like to say to a listener right now who may be in that dark spot, in the pinch point moments, like reaching and like, what would you like to say to them right now to help them to rise up?
I will say to them that if you are feeling alone and cut off and not resourceful, which is very common in those moments, I will remind you that the divine sits within you. We have programs in ourselves to hide it from ourselves. And so when you look for the divine and it looks like there's nothing there, talk to the program and tell it to go away. I see you, program, go away, because the divine sits within you, and all of your answers, all of your power sits within that little seed. And part of the reason you're sitting in the dark right now is because if you're looking for a very faint light, you have to turn off all the other lights to see it. It's there.
Thank you, Zofia, for being our guest today.
Yeah.
And one thing we didn't get to, but I want to tell our listeners about, is on Zofia's website, she has a soul gift quiz.
It's a superpower quiz.
Superpower quiz. Yes. So I'm going to go and take it, and I encourage you to go to her site. And could you tell the listeners what your website is, Zofia?
Yeah. To get to the superpower quiz, you go to superpowerquiz.us. Okay. And it will answer the question, what is my number one spiritual superpower?
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. And then we will have that link in our show notes too, and a link to your website. And you do work with people one-on-one, and is the best way for them to reach you to go to your website?
The best way to reach me, if you really need to talk to me right now, as opposed to just wanting to poke around my world, you can actually book a 20-minute conversation with me. It's a no strings attached thing. Book ZofiaCoffeeChat.com. It's BOOKZOFIA, coffeechat.com. And we just go through what's going on for you. What have you tried? What have you not tried? And what would be an amazing place for you to go next? And you can decide to take that journey with me or without me. It doesn't matter to me either way. But that's what that's for.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your gifts with our listeners today and with us. I have so enjoyed this conversation.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening to Sacred Rebellion. We love connecting with you in this way. If you want to join the rebellion and enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Sacred Rebellion.
Give us a rating and review, and please recommend us to your tribe. Follow us on social media at Sacred Rebellion Podcast on Facebook and Instagram.
Until next time, stay curious,
stay courageous, and most of all, stay rebellious.